Hello and welcome. I'm Maria Ressa. Welcome to Rappler Talk. With us now is the outgoing British Ambassador Asif Ahmad. He is in his final days in the Philippines. It's after 4 years. You're off on July 31.
Indeed, yes, and it's been 4 very dramatic years here.
Extremely. You've had the last 3 years of the Aquino administration and the first year of the Duterte administration. How would you describe the Philippines today?
Well, I think it's a complex country, and the more you get familiar with it, the more challenges there are in really understanding what makes things tick. And some of the issues you see are very long-term, both going backwards and going in the future. Others are very episodic. Something happens and it dies down again. But overall, I think the country is on a positive trajectory, and that's why we've engaged with the Philippines in such an enhanced way. I mean, if you think about 4 cabinet-level visits in the absence of one since 1997,
yeah.
The Princess Royal coming here, business booming, the level of travel going backwards and forwards. And I hope the impression that the UK has made here, from being a country that's sort of familiar but not really in your face, dealing with real issues that affect Filipinos and the region. And I think we've made our mark one way or another.
It's certainly been a contentious year internationally, with Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, the European Union speaking very frankly about human rights in the Philippines. And how did you navigate these waters?
Well, we've seen the Philippines play a role both ways. I remember when we were campaigning for the release of Aung San Suu Kyi and the ASEAN Charter was being written, the Philippines was right up there in the front and almost champing at the bit to say, this is how we want ASEAN to be. And I think human rights, politically, it's become a bit of a football, because fundamentally, if you say, do people want the right to liberty? Do they want to have a just trial if they've fallen afoul of the law? Do they want gender rights to be protected, or to live as they wish, or to practice whatever religion they wish? I mean, every Filipino would say, of course, that's absolutely vital and important. So I think to throw that around as though it was some sort of a negative football, I think is unfortunate, because deep down, really, what we're talking about is protecting ourselves against each other.
The drug war, which began July 1 last year, has killed thousands of people, and this is what's earned the ire of the international community. When you said that the Philippines is poised in a positive way, you're looking at it positively, is this economically? Is this in terms of the way this last year has gone?
No, we've defined the Philippines as an economic power and a social power. We labeled it the emerging power. And in that narrative, we see it as a regional force, a force for values, democracy, social development, trade, the whole gamut. So we're not going to sort of go around the buffet and say, well, this bit doesn't quite taste as good right now. We're in it for the long haul. And if you mention the drugs issue, this is a global issue.
Yes.
And per capita, I think the UK actually has a bigger problem than the Philippines. Our method of dealing with it is more comprehensive, and I can, in the conversation that I've had here with politicians, both of the present administration and the past, there is an admission that the problem was not perhaps given as much priority as it should. Now, any government that unleashes a new policy has to do some things in sequence.
Yes.
Firstly, you've got to actually allocate resources and money. This administration really started upon winning the election, and its own budget process didn't kick in until January. So you have a 6-month period where police officers, hospitals, jails, rehab centers were overwhelmed with demand, but without the wherewithal
to deal with it effectively. Yeah.
Then I think there was a focus on using the PNP for street-level drug use, with very little headway with PIDEA and being resourced to really target the way in which money flows in the system, the big shipments come in, where the drugs are manufactured, enhanced, and distributed. And unless you take a 360-degree view, you're going to end up with a bigger crisis than the one you started off with. And I think this is what the government's now grappling with, is that the monster is now out there.
Right.
How do you now deal with it in their millions? And how successfully can you prosecute them?
Yes.
I think also there's been some controversy in terms of the terminology that's being used.
Correct.
I'm more than content to use the definitions the Philippine government has used. And when I spoke to the police chief, Bato, he said the term he uses is deaths under investigation.
Yes.
I used the same terms when I saw the new Foreign Secretary, Alan Peter Cayetano. So he sort of says, good, because we don't want to use terminology that we don't have independent verification of, or the terms under which some of these operations were carried out. But then that leads to the question, how many deaths?
Exactly.
How many have been investigated, and how many people have been prosecuted? And I think we're more certain of the unfortunate numbers of people who are dead, but we're less certain that the processes have really been pursued with enough vigor to prosecute people who have done wrong. And I think the police itself is a problem. And this is something that the president himself has said.
Yes.
And when you have a police that is tainted in the way that it has been, in terms of planting evidence, in terms of cases that I'm aware of, where
Yes.
kids are picked up and then their parents are asked for a ransom. Now,
Yeah.
this is not something I've made up. These are first-hand testimonies that I've had. On the other hand, there are thousands of police officers just doing a great job under very, very demanding circumstances. And I've called on police chiefs up and down the country, and all of them have been shocked by the numbers that have been declared. Because in Baguio, for example,
Yes.
a very young police chief sort of said, when he first asked, when he got the job, how many drug-related cases do the barangays have? And I think about 470 odd. When he said, can I have the real numbers? It was 7,000.
Wow.
And the nearest rehab center to Baguio City is in Dagupan.
Wow.
Now, that is a challenge for anybody. So I think you've got to look at this as a huge problem.
Right.
It's a problem that I'll take with me to Jamaica when I'm working there, because it's a huge trafficking
Yes.
of drugs north and south, and then from the Caribbean across the Atlantic to us. You've got to look at it as a health issue. You've got to look at it as a welfare issue. In our jails, we have exactly the same situation that you face here in the Bilibid prison.
But the photos of our jails are really overwhelming.
I think by any stretch of the imagination, these are grotesquely overcrowded facilities.
Yeah.
The prison building program has lagged behind. There was talk of PPP,
Yes.
which is a bit tricky, because I think PPP works better when there's revenue generation, and I'm not entirely sure that the prisoners are generating the sort of legitimate revenues that one would expect. So I think
the other major problem now that you're leaving that wasn't there actually really when you came in is a situation like Marawi, where an ISIS-linked groups, a Filipino now recognized by ISIS Central as a leader here, has held territory or held parts of Marawi. I guess, how do you look at the terrorism problem that we're dealing with now? It's
even that's not new. We, the UK, have been affected by terrorism for a long, long time. Some of it domestic, some of it from other theatres, and some of it relating to the extremism, others related to the IRA and the Irish struggle. So it's not new to me. But also, rather ironically, there's a bookend to my term here. My credentials with President Aquino was postponed because of the Zamboanga siege. And of course, I end up here with where we are. This is, again, yet another global problem. But I think the situation in the Philippines is slightly different. Different because I don't think this is a subsidiary and a franchise of ISIS operating over here. I think this is more of an affiliation and trying to brand themselves as something bigger than they are, because actually it's quite diminished.
Yes.
Some of the action that's been taken, particularly by this administration, has been quite tough. The president reached out to Abu Sayyaf and said, if you choose a different course, there may be a conversation to be had. But that was the response to that was beheading. So he then really basically sort of said, well, we're coming for you. And that's why you're seeing actually the problem spreading, people turning up in Bohol or whatever. The situation in Marawi is something that we have been aware of developing and for over a 2-year period of younger people being radicalized, of disaffection,
and even the foreign fighters that are coming in, right? ISIS calling them in. I think it was Malaysia that was able to disrupt a cell from Sabah.
Yeah, but that's also, again, not new. It was happening under GI. That's why I really want to not exaggerate this whole black flag syndrome, because I think people have really got carried away that this is, we just brought this from downtown Baghdad and Damascus, and it's arrived here.
Not quite, it's an evolution of the networks that have been here in our country.
But we've seen that sort of empathizing and copycat activities in the UK, in the streets of Manchester and London, and we're seeing it here. And but alongside that is what I call the positive track, which is the peace process involving Bangsamoro. And again, a wonderful bookend. I arrived here, we made progress to the framework agreement, the CAB, and then just this week we saw the next process, and I'm really delighted to hear that President Duterte is going to sign it as an urgent bill. I think the first one that he's actually endorsing in that way, which was will be an interesting test, really, of the assumption that
he has a supermajority.
That he has a supermajority, because that majority is worth nothing unless it can actually deliver.
Do you still believe that the first step to actually dealing with any terrorist threat would be this peace agreement?
They run hand in hand.
Yeah.
If you look at the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland,
Yeah.
it ran alongside decommissioning it,
Yeah.
alongside taking care of the people who were never going to let down their arms. It really about normalizing
Yes.
day-to-day behavior. You know, we
Yes.
have a generation of first-time high school students who have not seen the military on the streets. And this is the United Kingdom we're
Yeah.
talking about.
Yeah.
You know, this is not some far-fled war zone. And I think if you pursue the peace dividend, it really has to be about people's livelihoods, about schools, roads, and also something that people have lost in all of this, the rights of women and people who are then are minority within a community.
Yes.
Filipinos are used to having this sort of Catholic mindset, but over there, if you get a devolved administration, then the question I posed to Cardinal Quevedo when he was so generous, he actually served me dinner himself in his residence in Cotabato City. And he actually said he doesn't fear being a cardinal where he's leading a minority faith group. He sort of said, we've known these people for generations, they've been to our schools. And I think that's the positive that we can really build on.
That's great, because in the end we also see countering violent extremism always goes back to the community, doesn't it? Really?
It does, and you've got to really rob them of this narrative.
Yes.
And the other difficulty we have, and I think this is something we're seeing worldwide, and this is part of my explanation as to why homegrown Britons can commit these sort of crimes. You know, in some ways, people who remember a time when the Mass was said in Latin, Islam has gone through that same change. That in the beginning it was all in Arabic, and most people didn't understand what was being said, but they understood it to be something holy. Now it's translated into their own vernacular and in English, so people who are perhaps not really scholars, but people can just hijack some of the phrases and just add this narrative. And I think I've seen this happen in the UK, where people come up with a cumulative narrative. They say, you believe in God, you believe in the Holy Scriptures, you believe in the Prophet, etc., etc., etc. Well, they say these things. And then you're on this thing where you're saying yes, 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 and then when they say, so are you willing to fight for your faith? You're almost by default sort of saying, well, how can I say no to this when I've said yes to all the preceding questions? But it's a very astute way of
radicalization. Yeah, absolutely.
But in some ways, the very tools that we've used to improve ourselves have turned on itself. Language, technology, and the means.
So technology, and this segues to, I think, what we've seen in the Philippines in the last year is a weaponization of the internet, of social media, which was a tool for empowerment, really, from 2012 until then. And that reflects a global landscape, bots, fake news, fake accounts. Oxford University came out with something called Computational Propaganda. How did your take on this? You've seen this grow from empowerment to weaponization.
Actually, I have a confession to make. Because about 4 years ago, I sat across you and you started talking about big data, etc.
Yeah.
Now, as a true diplomat, I had to pretend I knew what you were talking about. And I sort of very, very wisely sort of nodded and agreed with it. But then I actually went and did my homework. And exactly what you're talking about is that people are now leave a digital footprint through every behavior of their consumer behavior, the communication, where they go on a certain day, when it's raining, when it's sunny, how ideas are moving. And even in the
cascade, and actually exponentially cascade.
And I had this experience again with my niece in London just before the British elections, and she was talking as though in a foreign language. She was talking about her vlogs and how she was going to reach out to people and using grime stars to promote the left agenda. And she said she'll live with the leftists, but she's even more left of the left sort of thing. Very sort of a young, radical viewpoint. And later on, when we heard the narrative as to some of the elements that influenced the election, I heard those same things again about atypical behavior. So I think it is for real. It is happening globally, and of course it's happening here in the Philippines. I see that. And
you're also on Twitter. You actually, I'm sure you feel it. You
feel the immediacy of it. You feel the heat of people who disagree with you. You feel the impact of often repeated fake attacks that then people sort of assume are true because so many people are talking about it. And people forget to see the rebuttal where it actually happened. But you've got to basically arm yourself with the same tools that everybody else actually has. And I think we are capturing that space ourselves. But it means that people like us have to become less pompous. We've got to be able to distill complex things and sort of say in a few characters
Simplify.
what this is.
Yeah.
Somebody did ask me once to explain the Middle East peace process in a tweet. I thought, no, that was probably one tweet beyond me.
Did you? So did you try? That would be interesting.
I of course knew how to do this because I actually then put a link to what the Foreign Office has actually been saying about this.
Right,
I cheated slightly,
right.
but it is and maybe that is the whether you're a lawyer or an IT person or a diplomat, I think somehow or other people demand the right to be spoken to in a way in which is not mysterious.
Yes.
You make it relevant.
Yes.
In how will their lives change if X happens or it doesn't happen? In the same way that we did the climate change advocacy,
Yes.
we took it from a fairly agnostic and a very difficult crowd that the Philippines was with, to the Philippines going to Paris and being one of the outriders saying we wanted even lower rises in sea temperature, and a skeptical President Duterte then endorsing it. So, and a lot of that was us being able to really say, look, if you don't do something here in Southeast Asia, you won't be able to grow rice. It's as stark as that. Your fishermen are already complaining about their catches. Just imagine what's going to actually happen.
Another project you were focused on, we worked together on this, is corruption, anti-corruption efforts. I mean, how would you gauge the way it's progressed?
I think governments here and elsewhere have grasped the damage that it causes. When we did our anti-bribery law in the UK, it reached beyond the United Kingdom. And it reached beyond somebody using a middleman. Our tentacles will reach as far as it can to stop this from happening. And if we lose business as a result, so be it. But we're not going to do business on any other basis than clean hands. The previous administration's slogan all the way through was the
straight road,
straight road.
Yeah.
And it was laudable, but I'm not sure it was eliminated. And if you go backwards, there are many instances of corruption becoming endemic. I think the challenge remains. I don't think a new administration can come in and say they will root out corruption and root and branch, and simply because the temptation is too great. Some of the projects, and we're going to have a whole slew of infrastructure projects, and the more these are broken down into bits, the more suspicious I get, because that means you have multiple opportunities. Whereas if you have one big deal with, let's say, JICA or somebody, or an EU-funded project, or the UK coming in or the ADB, I think it's more difficult to unbundle those things. But if it's small penny packet projects, then there's always a chance of leakage. I think it's also to do with pay. And if you pay people very poorly, the temptation is huge. And I think there also has to be consequences. I think this is where the Philippines has quite struggled. The judicial process, by the time the Ombudsman's office gets around to it, you're almost dealing with ancient history, not in real time. So basically people think, well, maybe by the time they catch up with me, I'll have long gone. And I think also people need to have some sort of sense of political security of tenure. If you think you're going to be around for 6 years to be answerable for what you've done, I think there's probably less temptation to do it. And here I think there's an issue. Every country has a different way of governing, but I think I know why you only have one single fixed term of 6 years. Because
it's a reaction to our past.
It's a reaction to the past. But the danger of that is that any elected president is no longer answerable. He doesn't have to come back and say in year 3 or 4 saying, well, I promised you X, Y, and Z, I promised you anti-corruption, here it is. Now give me another 4 years.
So accountability.
It's, you have to have faith that the president and his team will deliver this. And I have no reason to doubt his sincerity in what he's actually doing. But old habits die hard. I think corruption is part of the national curriculum here. Because from day one, you're taught if you don't give the teacher something, you don't get the course. That you don't get the morning shift, you get the night shift. If you go to college and if you don't sell enough of the goods that the teacher wants you to sell as part of your so-called outreach project, part of your business degree, these are all basically lessons in corruption from day one. I always say, for example, when people come to our embassy for a visa, etc., I said, we have a front door and a front door only. We've improved it, we've made it efficient, but there is no back door. And in fact, if something happens because you've spoken to me, it's because you're actually a legitimate applicant and the system works, not because you have some sort of connection. And I think that will take a long time to go, but it's not impossible. In the region, you've seen it in Singapore.
Yeah.
You've seen it in Hong Kong up to a point, where the legacy of our systems have held.
So for us in the past, we always used to say that the level of corruption could go down with stronger institutions that are there, right?
Yes, and the speed at which the consequences come is absolutely vital.
Yeah. Let's go to Great Britain. I mean, we talked about technology and its impact. I always say that 2016 seemed to be the year that technology broke democracy, and the first in line, which gave strange results or results that weren't quite anticipated, was Brexit. Where's Great Britain now with this, and how are you doing? How is your country doing in this new global landscape?
Well, there are two things. What is technology is a reality, but democracy is not broken. It's a reality too. We may not like what it's doing, or we may misunderstand the signals. I think the statement I heard from our own Prime Minister when I was in London just last week was that try as you can, you cannot set the agenda and the battleground on which you want to fight an election. You can set out your manifesto, you can set out your objectives, but in the end people will decide.
Yeah.
And I think the government tried to really fight the elections on the grounds of an empowered Brexit mandate. And the people sort of said, well, we've given you that one.
Yeah.
Go ahead and deliver it.
Yeah.
What about care? What about education? What about roads, etc.? And then I think they realized that there were some tactical issues. But I think if you look at it, this is not a party political point that I'm making.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is that every political party that fought the election presented their findings, and almost everybody got less than what they wished for. The opposition didn't get enough seats to govern.
Yep.
The Scots did not get a mandate to really push hard on independence. You didn't get a very strong anti-Brexit view either. So it's quite a mixture of what has actually transpired. But I think that whole Brexit mood will now change into something else. And from this week, it really has started, which is there was a time for politics and political positioning, both from the European side and ours. And we've heard a lot of noise. Some of it, I think, unfortunate, because I'm not entirely sure that basically drawing lines up before we've entered a discussion is particularly wise. But now it's very technical. A team of just under 100 British bureaucrats went over there. They're going to go through line by line. And what people have perhaps not realized, whether you're pro or anti doesn't matter, but it's one hell of an undertaking. We have to decide whether in the future medicine approved in Hungary is still okay for us to use.
Yeah.
When a truck comes in from France, are they still, which rules are they behaving under? When a financial transaction happens in a multiple center, when the Airbus is built with all these components coming in from different places. And then fundamentally, the rest of the EU has a trade surplus with us. Surely they're going to shoot themselves in the foot and destroy their own agricultural businesses, manufacturing, etc., just because they have some quarrel with us. But we, in turn, will negotiate in good faith. We will do what is right. I don't think we're going to sell our country's economic well-being as a result of these negotiations. But I think what's good for the Philippines is that what we started 6 years ago will now be really stepped up, which is that we really have to reach out to new markets. And what better than the fastest growing for us in the region. In 2015, the Philippines for the UK was the second fastest growing export market.
Fantastic.
We've attracted investment from here into the UK, which was zero when I arrived here, to close to 1.2 billion pounds. And Philippine businesses have been doing well as well. And the commitment we've also made is that beyond our membership of the EU, the GSP Plus provision, which gives the Philippines tariff-free access for almost 90% of what it produces, we will continue with that.
Fantastic.
And if there's a free trade agreement already matured, we'll pluck that too. So I think it's nothing other than good news for...
You're positive. You're positive on
I'm
both
positive
fronts.
because we have to make it a positive.
You have to.
Because, and that is the right attitude to take. But I'm sure we can make it such that people who are worried by it in the UK and across the channel in the EU and elsewhere, we actually see that we are doing okay. I mean, if you look at our trade with North America and our economic connection with the US, they're not part of the EU. They never have been.
Yes.
But we've traded with each other. We are one of the biggest investors in the US and vice versa. It's helpful to have had this marriage for the last 43 years, but I'm sure we can actually come out of it with just a really newly defined relationship rather than something that remains cantankerous and a sort of a continuing cloud over our relationship. But
right.
It's a natural thing, you know, when something so dramatic happens.
Yes.
And, but you know, we're also fortunate in a sense that under the British system, when there are regime changes at the top, it really is the Prime Minister, the senior ministers, and 2 or 3 others in each department. The rest are all intact.
Yeah.
Now here, for example, I mean, I have a lot of empathy for any administration that comes in. I mean, basically, an incoming president of the Philippines has to find between 3,000 to 6,000 people that they have almost a degree of separation of zero with,
right.
who they can trust to run the country.
I think that was something that shocked President Duterte, well, then Mayor Duterte, when he
yes.
was given that you have to appoint 6,000 people, right?
And that's still going through.
Yeah,
the
exactly.
fact that there isn't a U.S. ambassador, which is actually a huge gap that needs to be filled.
So let's go back to the Philippines. President Duterte now enjoys one of the highest levels of trust, and I think it's at 85%, right?
Yeah.
In performance ratings, and he's about to deliver his second State of the Nation address. What do you expect to happen? How do you think his first year has been?
I think traditionally all presidents of the Philippines have been given an understandable first year,
yes.
Just to get to grips with what was on the agenda. I think his appeal was that he was different, and he surely has proven
that he's different, definitely.
That he's different, and what he said was his priority in his campaign. He's beginning to articulate those.
Yeah.
I mean, even the signing of the draft BBL. I mean,
yes.
you know, even in his very last campaign platform in the central Manila.
Yes.
He actually was saying this is what he was going to deliver. Quite a brave offer for a candidate to actually make.
Yes.
The drugs campaign we've talked about.
Yes.
But what we haven't really talked about a great deal is the 10 out of 10 I give to the 10-point economic and social agenda.
Yes.
It's inclusivity. It's realization of the backlog of investment, embracing foreign investment, liberalizing the constitution, and my personal passion of making sure that education is liberalized at the same time.
Right.
So you have British universities working alongside Filipino ones here.
When it was announced, you were very bullish about it. In execution, is it coming out?
It's still early days, and I think some of the problems are partly, as I said, choosing the right people.
Yeah.
Some of the difficulties are, you know, because there are checks and balances.
Yeah.
If you look at the difficulties that the Transport Secretary has had
yes.
of seeking emergency powers, my suggestion to him all along was my suggestion to the former Transport Secretary is instead of doing it that way, pass enabling bills that gives you the National Railway Bill, that gives you the National
right.
Road Bill, etc., so that you don't need emergency powers. You have legislation that says this is what you'll build by when and under these circumstances. Because without that, you're going to have this process of attrition in every twist and turn. I think that's been one thing. The second thing is that in the end, it's still a democracy. You yes. cannot force things down people's throats in terms of building something through their backyard. There
yes.
has to be a permissive environment. And I think also you've got to work change through institutional rules and processes, and if you're going to really turn things upside down, you need to be pretty certain that what you're replacing is better.
Yeah.
So I think from a foreignness perspective, and from the Filipinos I've spoken to, I think they're willing to cut some slack in the first 12 months, but it really starts from the SONA onwards,
right. which
is, okay, now deliver. And there comes a point in administration where you simply cannot keep referring to the neglect of the past. At some point it becomes your issue.
Yes.
You have to wear it and deliver it. And I think, you've got although the president doesn't come up for re-election, in 2019 there will be another opportunity for people to. And I get a sense more and more, particularly when I observe the senators, that they've had to become much more issue-based. And they've been given a stark choice sometimes of, are you with with the cause, or are you against?
Yes.
I hadn't noticed that much of if you like, positioning in the previous Congress, which I think is interesting.
Interesting. That's good. So this is, I mean, you're a familiar face for Rappler, for our community here, and all of the things that our civic engagement arm has also done. And Your last thoughts as you leave the Philippines?
My last thoughts are that I sort of sense a feeling of achievement here in terms of as a UK diplomat set out to achieve a mission. From our perspective, yes, it's gone well. The challenges are huge, and my welcome here was the whole earthquake, Zamboanga siege, and then Typhoon Yolanda.
Yeah, I remember.
And we were able to step up and engage and do something. And in areas where we've collaborated with the Philippines, I can show tangible outcomes where we have made an impact. I think the people of the Philippines actually deserve better from their businesses, from their government, from a local right to the national level. I think that test is yet to be passed. People are patient here, but that I think can become part of the problem in the sense that you will tolerate things which very few people would actually tolerate for time and time again. And I think we have actually reached a point, and I think the people in government that I speak to realize this, that the people's expectations have been raised. They all know what the problem is. They also know that the solutions are slow in coming, but they'll expect to see those changes. And along the way, there'll be some difficult choices to make. But the reason why I'm optimistic, it goes down to the core essence of this country. I think there's a real talent pool here. The fact that 11 million people work abroad and are highly rated shows that this is not a Filipino is not inherently incapable of actually producing good things in the modern world.
Yeah,
I think the age profile is superb.
23 is a median age.
People are consuming, so there's you don't have the problem of China.
Yep.
But people need to be more involved as productive investors. I think this is what's lacking. I think people will, at a low level, will just set up another sari store against another one.
Yes.
At the high level, the big corporations will do what I call imitation. They'll bring in franchises, etc.
Yeah.
But I think this country can innovate.
Can create.
Create. And then I also see huge upsides in connecting the rural economy with the urban economy and then the world.
Yeah.
If you look at the produce that this country can actually produce, it's not really about rice self-sufficiency, it's about producing cash crops that have real value. So you could buy the rice if you're short of it in bananas, rather than pretend you can grow rice with the wind sort of going through your fields. And there are many products that the countries like the UK would happily source from here if there was guaranteed supply, guaranteed quality and phytosanitary arrangements, and there was an opportunity for value added along the way. The containers that come into the Philippines come in full, and then they get stuck here because there's nothing to stick in them.
Correct.
You should be able to negotiate tough freight rates with the shippers and with the airlines, and actually fill the underbellies of these planes with Filipino goods and services. There are a lot of talented, creative people here.
Yeah.
Some people here basically talk about livelihoods in indigenous people, etc., etc. Now, up to a point it works, but unless you produce something that somebody can put on their showcase in the West, which has some it lives well alongside modern living.
Right.
And you don't need to look very far. People like to live like that here too.
Right.
I've seen capiz things made here, some of it very traditional, which when you buy it, it looks great. When you take it home, you think, oh my God, why did I do this? And yet I've seen other pieces with the blending what you might call Western style design with that handicraft underneath it.
So it's growing the creative economy, right? It's adding because it's not the natural, it's not the raw art, but what we do to it.
And avoiding the mistake that some of us have made in rampant tourism, for example. I mean, in terms of natural destinations and vistas, I've seen some stunning things here.
Told you.
Absolutely stunning. Yeah. But let me give you one example. I was able to persuade a friend of mine to take my family on a 5-day sailing holiday around Mindoro. We saw things that very few people will see: turtles, tuna chasing fish. We did our shopping off bancas. We stopped off in small places. We replenished the ship, which was a 5-cabin ocean-going catamaran.
Nice.
We were able to replenish it with natural spring water in places that you hadn't heard of. Places that probably don't even have names. And yet, this country forbids foreign owners of such vessels to charter them. You have to have a Filipino-owned crew.
Wow.
Now, You talk to the owners of the big hotels here. What would you rather have? Would you have three days in your casino and then they disappear, or would you like them to spend $1,500 a night because they're on your floating hotel?
Yeah.
And the multiplier effect of that in terms of local produce, local shops and others making.
But that goes back to policy setting, isn't it? And making sure that the details align with policy.
Yeah, and for Filipinos to actually realize what a jewel they're sitting on, and rather than really spoiling it. I mean, Boracay, when it was first on Lonely Planet, everybody thought, wow, this quiet, undiscovered white sandy beach. Now you go there and you really are fighting for space and the basics, sewage treatment, power, housing for ancillary staff.
We warned against things like this happening.
And it's, in Puerto Galera, which a lot of expats go to, 7 years running, they still haven't built a sewage plant. So when you go diving there, you're diving with things that you'd rather not be with. But these are things that are fixable.
Yes.
In Iloilo City, the river's cleaned up.
Yeah.
They're restoring the old classic buildings. They've got these shiny new complexes where there'll be young people living, working, playing. It is possible here. I don't think everywhere needs to turn into this sort of booming Thai sort of resort type of thing. I think the Philippines can leapfrog all of this. And that goes back to this connectivity that I'm talking about rural and urban. And then
global.
The other thing is, Filipinos have to have faith in their own product. Most people, when you say, where do you want to go on holiday, they'll say Tokyo, elsewhere. Very few people say, they could do a 2-week holiday somewhere here in the Philippines. I've done it, it's possible, and it's great.
I love the Philippines. Well, thank you. We've been speaking with British Ambassador Asif Ahmad, the end of his 4 years in the Philippines. If you have questions, he's on Twitter, @Asif A. Ahmad.
That's it.
I'm Maria Ressa. Thank you for joining us. Thank you.
Well,
my God, you're so diplomatic. Of course.